Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Here with Randy, I want to introduce what we're going to do on a weekly basis here with these videos. Today we're going to learn about Randy, his background, how he kind of, comes to found the company. But going forward, going to talk, of course, about the company, recent news, the industry, lots of other stuff. And please, if you've got questions or things you want to see in the video, please drop it below. We want this to be interactive. We'll definitely do some Q&As and some other things. But here we go. Randy, first things first. How are you?
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, well,
Crazy
awesome.
times,
Well, look,
crazy times
happy,
right now.
yeah. Happy
So
crazy times, but happy to be here, happy to be
hap-
doing these videos. Obviously,
yes,
thanks for doing them. I know a
thank you
lot of
for having
people are
me.
going to have good feedback, but here usually like to kick off like early life. I know you want to cover where kind of you grew up, first couple
Sure,
jobs, and we'll go through it from there.
absolutely. So my background is a little different. I imagine it's quite different for all founders, but I'm a son of a diplomat. I was born in Taiwan, and 2 months old, I flew into Barranquilla, Colombia. And when I used to tell the story, nobody knew where Barranquilla, Colombia is. But now they do. It's actually where Shakira is from. So that makes it a lot easier to tell the story. So I grew up, my dad was from Taiwan, a diplomat. He became ambassador, and he focused on Spanish speaking countries. So my first language is somewhere between Spanish and Chinese. And so my background really helped me a lot to become a founder. There was just a lot of uncertainty. I couldn't, I was 5 years in Barranquilla, Colombia, 6 years in Santa Cruz, Bolivia, but literally every 6 months, my dad could have been reassigned somewhere else. And so that certainly helped me quite a bit. So one of the things that I learned in South America is I needed to blend in. Every time I went to a new school, had new friends, I had to learn to blend in. So there's really two things that I always focus on. The first thing is what's the easiest thing that one can learn to blend in Spanish-speaking countries? This is probably not a surprise for many of you nowadays. If you play soccer, you blend in easier. So you don't, many other things, whether you speak the language, whether you have the right accent for Colombia versus Bolivia, later I was in Spain, it didn't matter. I could blend in much easier with soccer. And so I love to play soccer, and I learned to play soccer, and that allowed me to go to different countries and still make friends very easily. At the same time, it was really important to have something that differentiated me, something that stood out, which if you think about it from the opposite end of that, it always meant that there was something that I was deficient in. It didn't matter whether I spoke Spanish perfectly, hadn't learned the Bolivian accent well, Spanish accent. There was always something that I was behind. And so there was always something important that I needed to stand out on. And so example would be, I'm the best Chinese chess player that I know in Bolivia when I lived in Bolivia. And that's really a pretty low bar. But that allowed me to understand marketing efficiencies, right? So I'll talk about that later when I started different startups and different technology companies. It was always important for me to know something that made everybody else comfortable with me. But at the same time, if I want to stand out, I needed to be able to do something that there was a market inefficiency towards that. And I'll talk about that a bit later.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Well,
after,
awesome
right?
background so far. That's hilarious.
Yes.
I hope that's a real thing when you're saying you're the best Chinese chess player.
I
That's
was, I
awesome.
was. I actually won the trophies and little things that it was actually
Wow.
amazing that there was a Chinese chess tournament to begin with.
Yeah.
But yes, as a 10, 12, I can't remember whether it was 10 or 11, I beat everyone. Again, very low bar, as you can imagine. There's just, back then, not that many Chinese people to begin with.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, awesome. Well, here. So
So
what's next? So then walk me through. So you're
one next.
standing out.
Sure. So then I was really lucky when I was actually in Bolivia, Santa Cruz, Bolivia. And so I was in 7th grade, and one of the teachers just was obsessed with Apple. This is literally, I gotta say, 1985 or so. Apple couldn't have been in business for more than 2 or 3 years. So she decided the school needs Apple computers. And as you can imagine, being in Santa Cruz, Bolivia, that was almost impossible. And so she just got them shipped from America, started teaching computer science. So as a 7th grader in South America, I learned BASIC and Lisp in different languages. That was fantastic because ironically later on, I'll tell the story later on, I actually attended Cupertino High, smack in the middle of Silicon Valley. When you look at your iPhones in the past, it would say made in Cupertino. Yet when I attended Cupertino High as a high school student, there was no computer science. So blew my mind away. So I was always very interested in computers. And my parents bought me a Commodore 64 when I was little, and so that was fantastic because there were no computer shops, as you can imagine. I don't know if there were any in South America, but certainly not in Bolivia. So when something broke, software or hardware, I would have to open it up, fix capacitors, fix different things, be self-sufficient very early on, not because I wanted to, but certainly just if you had to ship something back to
Made by
Cupertino or
fire. Love it.
yeah, it's just either that or I don't have a computer. That's just the reality of life. Okay? And so a lot of what you got to hear about me had to do with just not just challenges, but excitement and things that I could do to make my life better. And I love computers and love programming from very early on. Then I went to UC Berkeley, got my computer science degree there. And when I graduated as an immigrant, it was interesting. Back then, Sun and Microsoft were the hot companies that you would get a job from. Sun doesn't even exist anymore. So I tell people that we hire out of schools nowadays. You know, many of them, some of them want to go to the Googles and the Facebooks. And I said, well, watch out. You know, in 10, 20 years, these may not exist. So I think it's better if you come to a startup. So here's how this went for me, right? So I was an immigrant. First question I had, besides going through the interview process, is, well, how long is it going to take for me to get a green card? Right? And every single one of them would come back. Even back then, this is a long time in the 80s, early 90s. They would come back and they say, this will take more than 5 years, 5 to 10 years. And it's just like, oh my God, that just cannot be. And so I literally took out an immigration manual and read the manual and I asked people, why does it take 5 to 10 years? I think that this can be done in 2 years. So I literally went to the first company, a startup that I really didn't understand what they did at the time. I didn't understand what a startup was. And they said, well, we'll do whatever you want to do. We'll pay for the lawyer. You go talk to them. And that's literally what I did. And so I got my green card in less than 2 years. Luckily, what you got to hear a lot of my life story here is this company goes on IPOs. And I had no idea. When I got my offer, I literally just looked at the amount of money they were going to give me and how much they were going to pay the lawyers. I did not even know what stock was. So I get the stock. I work for this company. Within 2 years, I get a green card and the IPO. It was just fantastic. It was just, whoa, that means more money. And at the time, we jokingly, we talked about what does that mean? And somebody said, well, you can go see what your boss makes. And so that was great. I could open up the perspective and realize, wow, whoa, he makes way more than I do. So that was cool. So then that's kind of my background on accidentally going into startup.
Yeah.
Right. So if you look at what we do at Nubeva now, my last company, Panzura and Aruba, that's really what we call enterprise networking or enterprise cybersecurity company. And so I then, after my first startup, then I started looking purposefully into startups. I realized this is cool. I would never be able to work in a larger company. I love startup life. There's a certain amount of uncertainty, but the reality is, if you look at how when I grew up, there's just not even close, right? So startups versus changing countries where you lived, making new friends, not comparable. So I think I was kind of made for this, right? The uncertainty associated with this. So the company that I really wanted to join, this is Alteon Web Systems. At the time, they supplied load balancers and networking equipment to, back then, I don't think it was the Amazons of the world. It was really the early Yahoos, the AltaVistas of the world, right? And we knew .com was taking off, and the companies that provided the infrastructure were the best companies to join at the time. It was crystal clear. So I knew nothing about networking other than what I learned in Berkeley. So I literally take a month off. I take every book that I could find, study for it, and I interviewed for the job. And the interview was very interesting because many of them now became my lifetime friends, right? So I interviewed with a founder who was a professor, and I tended to do really well with the professor. And then there was another person that was going to interview me to test me on what I knew how to implement. And that was going to be a disaster, but because I kind of showed up to this interview and I said, I know this when I really had never written anything in cybersecurity networking. Right? And luckily that person did not show up. He had to go do something else. And it's a funny story because later on become very good friends. And I actually started my last company, Panzura. He was with him. He was the CTO of the company. I was the CEO of the company. So we still joke about that. Had he showed up on that interview, he would have gone, oh my God, this guy knows nothing. We can't hire this guy. And I probably would have gone down some other path. So that's Alteon. Alteon later, you hear these stories during the .com era. IPOs get sold for the bargain price at the time. Many people complain for $7.8 billion. Just unbelievable run. just it was considered a bargain at the time. And I was in charge of what was called SSL acceleration, which I'm going to talk about that later on. So at the time, a lot of the websites couldn't afford to run encryption. It was so computationally expensive that they had to put this device in front of it to do all the encryption. And so I was in charge of it. Everything was essentially software driving the hardware to make websites function from an encryption standpoint. Okay, and those were crazy days. I'm not going to mention websites nowadays that are Fortune 5 companies nowadays, but they would actually send me their certificates and say, "Hey, the encryption doesn't work," and I go, "Oh my God, you're really not supposed to email me this." So this is just early on encryption. It was a great experience for me. Then with the same group, and you hear this a lot in Silicon Valley, right? My boss becomes a VC, and we all go to this wireless company called Aruba Wireless Networks. Okay, and at that point, it was very crystal clear. Everything's got to go wireless. It's just a matter of when, not if. Right? Laptops were being procured. Intel spent $150 million to get everybody to start doing wireless. It was fantastic. And so I was in charge of not only the data path at Aruba, but also all the encryption and all the federal related certifications. And later on, this is really when I transformed from being just an engineer to more product management, to understanding the sales process. Right? We sold this 9-figure deal to the US Air Force, and we were the first product that was FIPS validated and common criteria certified. So that means we were the first and only product that literally, if somebody wanted to run wireless in the federal government, NSA, CIA, they had to go with our product. Okay? So that was great. Aruba then IPOs on the NASDAQ, 2 billion market cap. Later I left and they were bought by HP. I think market cap raised up to about 5 billion. I think they were sold for about 3 billion at that point. Then after that, I decided, hey, this the startup thing, I'm getting a hang of this. And so I wanted to start my first company. And at Aruba, I was part of the founding team, but I was not the founder or the CEO. And so at Panzura, I was first-time founder and first-time CEO at that point. This is when I started raising money with Silicon Valley VCs, raised about $60 million. And what Panzura did was, again, a lot of the encryption that I've been talking about over and over here, the Altiums, the Arubas, and we sold 8-figure deals over to the DOJ. We got the product FIPS validated. And the last valuation that I actually raised the company at was about $250 million before I left. And recently, I think a couple of years ago, Panzura was bought by a hedge fund after I left. Okay, so that's kind of the background leading up to Nubeva.
Yeah.
Okay.
Incredible. So wow, Bathed by Fire. I mean, love tech. That's hilarious. Another crazy example of, I guess if you call it the butterfly effect, the guy doesn't show up to the interview. Yeah, you end up just hitting it off with the, guy who's a professor and you get the job and one thing leads to another. Incredible. And then, it really what sounds like you had your first kind of tech experience, really startup experience and successful exit, really without even knowing it, in your early days, first job. So obviously exciting. Wow. Some good timing by the sounds of it. Also seems like hard work, taking a month off just to study, read as many books as you can.
I like to
really
read.
interesting. So obviously I love the hard work. And now, so walk me through. So, where's the beginning parts of, the next company, I guess.
Nubeva. That's where I'm at now, right? So by the time I started Nubeva a few years back, this is when I've done enough startups.
So first things first, I want to say,
please.
We so we were chatting right before this, and we were talking about the name. Walk me through Nubeva and how it kind of came up and what's the part before there. And I know we're going to do a deeper company chat next week, but I have to ask how you got to that.
Yeah, Nubeva, nube in Spanish is cloud. And so I kind of wanted something that was easy to pronounce for immigrants. And so Nubeva. What I really screwed up on this company is, it's interesting, I'll talk about this. Chevron was an early investor and customer advisor, and obviously they're from Houston. And they would pronounce that Nubeva. And I go, oh my God, I cannot believe how I screwed this one up. So I got the immigrants to be able to pronounce that, but not the native speakers. So next time I'm gonna actually run a test with a lot of people before I name a company.
Hey, it's a tech company,
it's
whatever.
There you go. Exactly. Thank you. Thank you
Yeah,
for
no,
letting me
awesome. Well,
off on that
so
one.
walk me through. So, did you just have the entrepreneurship bug? What happened? What was the opportunity that you saw, and you're like, boom, let's start this company? I'm curious. Just had a successful exit before it, so I'd love to talk about the passion, behind. Hey, let's do another one.
Yeah, so by the time I started Nubeva, I mean, I really could only work in startups. I couldn't work in a larger company. And so when, for example, when Nortel was bought by, excuse me, when Alteon was bought by Nortel for $7.8 billion, I mean, I got a great experience in being in a larger company, but I realized that wasn't for me. That's for other people who like larger companies and like more discipline and process. But I can't kind of like to the speed and the movement and being able to do a lot of different things. And so the way Nubeva, I'll take you to a slightly longer contextual story. This is not the pitch. I think we're going to do a pitch that will go much faster in getting to what we do.
Yeah.
But Nubeva, really, the idea for Nubeva it started for me when I was at Panzura. So in 2013, Snowden leaks NSA information. And he leaked a lot of different things, and you can watch the movie and all the different exciting things that he leaked that was interesting for other people. But for me, the biggest one is when Google data centers were hacked. They were not just hacked, but really the notes on it basically made fun of Google. I think there was a smiley face saying, hey, we got Google this time. And that really, really upset Google. Google was one of my customers, early customers at Aruba Networks. That was, we would sell them 7-figure deals every single quarter. As Google was growing, we were growing at Aruba. And so we knew a lot of Google people, and they were just furious about this. Okay? And so when that happened, it wasn't just them. A lot of the tech giants started deciding, okay, enough of this. We're going to encrypt everything. So if you start looking at websites around 2014, 2015, whereas in 2013, I'd say 70 to 80% of websites had no encryption. If you're not going into healthcare or financials, there was no encryption. ESPN was just as is, right? The search engines were, why would you need to encrypt that?
Yeah.
Which now, if you then look at around 2016, 2017, everything was encrypted. Not only was everything encrypted, but everything was PFS, perfect for secrecy encrypted. So what that meant was, even if at a later time, you were able to get the secrets that encrypted this thing, the data that you're looking at, you can't decrypt that anymore. So not only did you have, everything was encrypted, but you literally had to be part of the connection to see everything when it was happening. If you come back a month later or 10 years later, and somebody, whether the NSA or some other country comes back and says, oh, I got the private keys for the certificate, it wouldn't do them any good. They still couldn't decrypt that. And so that's when you would have heard TLS 1.3 coming out for secrecy. Every single website started in financials and healthcare all went to PFS. And so that's when it got us this idea at Nubeva, which is, hey, you know what? When I left Panzura and I started Nubeva, I said, hey, remember what happened in 2013? How do we take advantage of that? So we started chatting with some of the customers that we had previously. In this case, for example, Chevron. Chevron was an early investor and customer and advisor of ours. And they were moving everything. This is everything that I share about Chevron here is just public knowledge. They were literally moving everything they had into the public cloud, Microsoft Azure. And as they were moving it onto it, they were looking at data that was happening on Azure on their systems, on Chevron's system, software system, and they couldn't reconcile all the data. So in other words, they would say, I said this amount of data, but we see this amount of data going through. And as you can imagine, this difference was TLS encrypted. And they kept asking us, what is this? It turned out that was just statistics that the cloud is sending in and out. It was just harmless stuff. But that's when we realized people need to know that, need to be able to see what's in it. You can guess what's going on. You can ask who created that. You can use AI. There's a lot of companies now that use artificial intelligence to look around things based on behavior to guesstimate what it is. But nothing replaces seeing the data inside it. Okay? And then after that transpired, you started seeing Microsoft Office 365, Google G Suite, certain things, certain websites when you go through Chrome, even Instagram. Everything was not just encrypted, not just PFS encrypted, but the data was actually pinned. So what that meant was if anybody, even people that are allowed to go in and see data based on the law, couldn't get in between the connection. Everything was encrypted end to end, and you couldn't intercept it. And that's when we realized it was just growing. This was a trend. When we do a startup, we want to attach ourselves to trend, right? If you think about Aruba Wireless, we knew wireless was coming, so you want to get on some wave of things that will take you, even so you can do your innovation and then ride on other people's innovations, and it just grows exponentially from it. So we knew at that time that our OEM partners, people that offer cybersecurity, firewalls, IDS, IPS, the 5G world, the folks doing performance analysis, they had more and more of these applications and websites where everything was encrypted and they couldn't see in it. And so if you look at recently the SolarWinds hacks, for example, that was a hack completely from within the software itself. So in other words, it was not some software that people didn't believe in, and it actually penetrated directly in the software itself. So it was not something shipped by somebody else or penetrated somebody's computer, nothing like that. Everything was actually inside SolarWinds possession by the time it made it into their customers. And so seeing what actually is going through all those TLS connections was absolutely critical. You couldn't just say, okay, I'm just gonna scan this, pirate website on movies or something related to Dogecoin or Bitcoin or things that are kind of gray area iffy. You really had to scan everything. You had to scan sites that you thought there's just cannot possibly be a hacker going through this site, and there are. That's just the reality of things nowadays. And so we knew that there were more and more of these companies. And that's why when we started Nubeva, we realized people want to see into the data. They want to see the encryption of the data. And so that's when we realized at first we were going to end users, and then we were just like a Chevrons of the world. And then we realized, wait a minute, they need to get firewalls and IDS and IPS and performance analytics on what's going on in their software from their providers. So their providers became our OEM targets. That's how we decided. This is just pretty obvious. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when.
Yeah,
and we
look,
also
awesome.
sorry.
It's a crazy story, honestly. This was awesome, and again, thanks for doing this. Some good teasers for things we're gonna have to talk about in future videos. It'd be really interesting to do a video talking about kind of where things were when you got into the industry years and years ago, and kind of where they are now, but also where you see them going. And pretty interesting to chat about. Really what goes on behind the scenes, the hackers, the tech, the everything. So we'll do some cool videos. And great time to ask anyone if they're watching, please drop some questions below, things you guys want to see. Would love to get Randy's thoughts on it. But now kind of my final question for you, how did you get so lucky to get the CEO role again? Walk me through. Some people talk that it's the worst, some people love it. Would love to hear
I
kind of more
absolutely love
about
it.
how you got so lucky, but also what your day-to-day, week-to-week is kind of in that CEO role.
Sure. The CEO role, again, when I was at Panzura, we brought in a CEO at the time. A lot of the VCs like to bring in somebody who you grow the company to a certain extent. You start having some wins from a product standpoint, and you bring in a CEO. And unfortunately, that wasn't a very good fit for us. So, and at that point, I realized, hey, I can do this. I learned from that experience, and I realized I could do this. And so that's really, I think, the story for each person who becomes CEO is always a little bit different. Mine is probably fairly common nowadays in the technology sector, where the technical person becomes the CEO. It used to be that if you're in sales or operations, you become the CEO because you understand how to scale. Now everything's kind of automated, so understanding the technology is more critical. So once I became the CEO and that worked out, then becoming the CEO again was really not only something that I could sign up for. It's really what the investors are banking on. At that point, they're thinking, hey, I'm taking risk on this, on that. I want somebody who's being a CEO. So again, I've been lucky enough in my career that I get a shot at something, and when I do and things work out, then I continue getting a shot at it. I'm sorry, I forgot the second part. I think you had a second part of your
just kind of what your day-to-day, week-to-week looks like. Yeah, just curious.
Yes. So day-to-day, I actually am much more purposeful than I used to. I used to just have a schedule, as you can imagine, what the product ideas are, talking to customers. Customers always come first. And so anything that the customer wants, when a customer wants to speak with me, I make time for that, and everything else kind of becomes second priority. Nowadays, what I try to make sure we also do is we always discuss strategy at the front end of the week. So as opposed to execution. What I realized is when I first became CEO, I'm all day long dealing with, oh, this kind of didn't work. That didn't work. Was this a sales commissions? Was it a product issue, a support issue? I'm always dealing with issues and don't have enough time to spend to think about what actually makes the greatest difference for the company. And so from a day-to-day standpoint, I speak to our co-founder every single day, including weekends, on holidays, et cetera, et cetera. I make it a point to talk to them and make sure that we start conversations talking about something strategic. What is it gonna really make the biggest difference? And then we talk about personnel, making sure the culture is right, making sure people like working here. We kind of created much more of a family situation here, especially with COVID. You know, you're not seeing people anymore. So you really have to purposefully invest on the strategy of making people feel connected. It's a crazy time. It was really, COVID was great for us from a business standpoint, but like everybody else, we suffer from a personal connection standpoint.
Yeah, no, interesting. And obviously, appreciate you doing these videos. And that was an awesome answer. Really great to hear. I mean, you guys are staying busy. You're talking to the co-founder every day. You know, even holidays. That's pretty funny. And I'm sure a lot of people can kind of share that if they've been in part of a startup, that's how it's like. There's no days off. You know, it's head down, wearing a lot of different hats, and that's awesome. But you know, thank you so much for the story. This is a great first video. A good sign of things to come. Is there anything else about your background or you that you wanted to get into this video?
No, this is fantastic. And I didn't actually complete your question. I thoroughly enjoy being a founder and CEO. This is, I tell all my friends, I wish all my friends that were with me at Altian, Aruba, Panzura, I wish that they become CEOs and founders. It's just it's an experience that is hard to describe unless you've been through it.
Yeah, awesome. Well, look, I appreciate it. And anyone who's made it this far, please drop any questions or things you want to see in future videos. We are going to be doing these things weekly. So Randy, thanks so much for joining. This was awesome.
All right, great. Thank you.